12:31. So thanks. I had to turn off a beeper. Are we ready to go?
Yes, Chair, we're ready to start whenever you are.
Okay, so welcome to the April 22nd Sandag Regional Planning Committee.
Hold on a second. April 22nd?
April 2nd.
Thank you. I hope I wasn't the only one that got that.
John, you missed a whole bunch of important appointments, okay?
I know.
Okay, so welcome to the Regional Planning Committee meeting. And since John opened his mouth, John, would you lead us in the pledge?
I certainly would. If those of you who want to, please rise. Those who don't, you can remain seated. Either way, place your hand over your heart and repeat along with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. God bless America.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And we should do a moment of silence for the Capitol Police officer that was killed earlier today. Thank you very much. So I'd like to remind everybody of our process for both the member and the public comments. The committee members will be using their cameras and we will take live public comments. Members are asked to turn on the cameras when they want to speak or when they have a comment or a question, and then I will recognize you. If you are a member of the public and would like to speak on an item, please use the raise hand icon in the Zoom toolbar and unmute yourself when you are called. Please also remember to mute yourself after you've made your comments. If you are calling into the meeting, please press 9 on your phone if you would like to comment on an item. All comments, whether emailed to us or live, will be made part of today's meeting record. Okay, so with that, let's start off with item number 1, which is public comments and public comments. Are there any, Francesca?
No, Chair, I don't see any hands from the public.
Okay, are there any communications from the members? Any member comments?
Chair, I do see a hand from Mayor Huebner.
Okay, Mayor Huebner.
Hi, I just wanted to say it's great to be with you. It took a little bit of time for me to get this appointment because I was originally appointed to executive, but it was too early in the morning for me. And Matt and I had switched the alternate in North County. It's a pleasure to be back on this committee. As you know, Chair Salas, I chaired this for a few years myself and find this to be an extremely important committee in the whole process of Sandag, especially in the year when we're developing the regional transportation plan. So I'm really pleased to be back with you all.
And we're pleased to have you and your expertise as well. So welcome.
Thank you.
So let's see, we already did the public comments from any member that wanted to speak on anything that wasn't on the agenda. So we'll move on from there. So let's move on to item number 2, which is the Executive Director's Report. Do we have one?
Yes, we do. Chair Salas, this is Ray Trainer, your Chief Planning and Innovation Officer, and I'm standing in for Hassan Akrada today. So members of the Regional Planning Committee, I just wanted to step through a few items that we've made note of this week, and I think all of us were quite excited to see the Biden administration's announcement regarding the infrastructure plan that occurred earlier this week. And I think what you'll find as we have looked at what we've been doing specifically with the development of the 5 big moves and the 2021 regional plan is that a lot of the work that we're proposing is really well aligned with this American Jobs Plan. So we're quite thrilled about this. And I think you'll see that the principles in the president's plan really focus on things that we're doing here, which is building tomorrow's mobility system, focusing on equity, climate change, and really building the region's economy. So we're quite thrilled about this. And I think as you look at things like our priority projects, and to note just a few of those that we see a lot of compatibility, that would be the State Route 11, Otay Mesa East Port of Entry project, our work to develop a central mobility hub and airport connection, and then the work to stabilize the Bluffs and Del Mar. All of these are projects that we think are really imperative to get the region's support behind and really drive forward the opportunity to try to fund these with this new infrastructure plan. We think that there's a big opportunity for the region as we try to make investment opportunities come to life. And these really significant projects, we think, offer a real opportunity for us to advance the region's initiatives. And related to that, just so you're aware, right now we've got about 120 different projects that are really ready to move forward over the next 18 months. And these alone are worth about $1.9 billion. So these are shovel-ready projects just looking for funding opportunities. So our plan is to work with you and our congressional delegation to review all the finer points in the president's plan. And as this begins to move forward, we want to make sure that we're ready to go and have a good forward progress to be able to make our case to the administration. Another thing just to bring up, we're quite focused on, and I think many of you have been quite concerned about what's happening with the Bluffs and Del Mar. And we had that serious collapse that took place just about 6 weeks ago. And our team is continuing to work very closely with our partners at North County Transit District on getting those emergency repairs completed. Just last week, the California Transportation Commission allocated about $10.5 million to really help us with these emergency repairs. And so that's going to enable us to continue to work not only with the City of Del Mar, but with the State Parks Department and the Sheriff's Department to ensure that the beachgoers are aware of all the danger that's there and the risk that's posed by the collapse. And while we're continuing to do this emergency repair work, we just want to make sure that the public's well aware of the activities that are going on. And this is going to continue through the month of July in order for us to be able to get this work all wrapped up. But we wanted to remind you as well that long term, we need to get the tracks off the bluffs. And so we've got our studies underway. We'll be bringing those studies back both here to the Regional Planning Committee as well as to the Board of Directors as those progress through the process of identifying alternatives for us to make this important rail connection up and down the coast. Moving into the South Bay region, the work we've got underway right now with the Otay Mesa East project is also advancing. The California Transportation Commission not only allocated those monies for the emergency repair in the bluffs, but they also allocated just about $43 million for our work at the Otay Mesa East Port of Entry, which is our joint project that we're working on with Caltrans. This is a nationally significant project. It's really essential to our economic vitality, and so we continue to push forward on this. The Trade Corridor Enhancement Program funds that were just allocated by the CTC are going to be used now for all the site preparation work and all the utility relocation to help us get prepared now for the next major milestone, which is obtaining financing for the project, completing the design, and then beginning construction on the Port of Entry. And the CTC's action didn't stop with those two projects. We also received $4.3 million to help support our Go by Bike program. And this is going to really now be used for us to fund an important project on Orange Avenue. It's part of that bikeway project in the North Park Mid-City communities. And then related to some funding, our finance team has continued to do amazing work with helping us make the best use of the funds that we've got, identify where savings could be obtained, and really try to help us take advantage of these historic opportunities within the financial markets. And so they just completed a refinance of our old 2014 Series A bonds and have saved now about $22 million for the region's taxpayers as a result of the new low interest rates that we obtained with this refunding. So when you put all this together, I think we've got now about $130 million of bond deals that are now able to help us in our Major Corridors program. And so we're quite pleased with the work that our team continues to do to support the region's priorities. Speaking of region's priorities, the Mid-Coast Light Rail project is about 90% complete. So this is really now getting close to the end here. The crews are working on all the final elements. They've got the 9 stations that are in various stages of construction. And they're also now working on all the power supply that enables the trolley to be able to move up and down that 11 miles of new tracks, creating that one-seat connection all the way from the border to UC San Diego. This summer, you're going to actually start to see our iconic red trolleys now traveling on those 11 miles of track as they start doing the testing and sort of the final shakedown work that's important for us to get the facility primed and ready to go for its opening here in the fall. So we look forward to that big celebration when that new UC San Diego Blue Line trolley will be open. And that concludes my report, Chair Salas. So I'll turn it back to you if there's any questions or comments from you or the members of the Regional Planning Committee. Thank you.
Lost connection for a minute. Are you finished with your report?
Yes, I am, Chair. I'm all done. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm having problems. I get this message that my internet is unstable. If I get kicked off again, is Miss Lawson Reamer there to take over just in case I drop out? So I'm just worried, a little bit worried about that. So first of all, Mr. Trainer, thank you. Thank you very much for that really encouraging report. There's a lot to be optimistic about in the coming years. So it's really exciting times, challenging times, but exciting times and great times for opportunity. Are there any members of the public that want to comment on the director's report? Francesca, do you see any?
No, Chair, I don't see any hands. I did want to let you know, unfortunately, the Vice Chair is not with us this afternoon, but it may help if you turn off your camera. That might help stabilize your connection a bit so your audio is better.
Okay, all right, I'll do that. You guys are going to miss my beautiful face, but you know, it is what it is. Okay, so I hope this works better. So are there any comments from the members? The committee members? Francesca, do you see any raised hands?
I don't see any hands, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And now I have my dog acting up. Okay, so now we're moving on to the consent calendar, which includes items number 3, 4, 5, and 6. Would any members like to pull an item from the consent calendar for presentation? Francesca, do you see any hands up?
No, Chair, I don't see any hands.
Okay, are there any members of the public that wish to pull any of the consent items?
I don't see any hands from the public either, Chair.
Okay, with that, then I will move approval of the consent calendar. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. Francesca, can you please call the vote on this?
Thank you, Chair. For the City of San Diego, Councilmember Elo Rivera.
Yes.
Thank you. For the County of San Diego is absent today. For East County, Mayor Minto.
Minto, yes.
Thank you. For North County Coastal, Mayor Gasterland.
All right, Gasterland, yes.
Thank you. For North County Inland, Councilmember Green.
Aye.
Thank you. And for South County, Chair Salas.
Aye.
Thank you very much, and that passes with those members present.
Okay, thank you very much. So now we'll move on to item number 7, and that is the 2021 Regional Plan Environmental Impact Report, 5 things to know. And Keith Greer is going to be presenting this item. Mr. Greer?
Good afternoon, Chair Salas and members of the Regional Planning Committee. Hope you're all doing well. Here I am remotely. I laughed at hearing the mayor's dog. I have that happen to me periodically, so I'm hoping that doesn't happen during my presentation. For those who don't know me, my name is Keith Greer. I'm the manager of San Diego's Environmental Compliance Team. And that's the team that's going to be developing the Environmental Impact Report under the state law known as the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, for the pending 2021 regional plan. So staff right now is busily developing that draft EIR, which should be available for public review later this summer. But in the meantime, I wanted to provide you a little short presentation to set the stage for a future discussion on the Environmental Impact Report. Or as I like to think about it, the 5 things that I hope everyone needs to know about the Environmental Impact Report for the 2021 Regional Plan. So you may recall that CEQA is the state law that requires us to disclose impacts on the environment from any kind of action that goes in front of the board. You probably deal with this a lot during your own city jurisdictional meetings on land use projects. So I want to kind of set the stage on CEQA. I've been working with California Environmental Quality Act for the last 30 years, and I'm always asked one thing: why does it take so long, and why are these environmental documents so big? So next slide, please. So we used to measure environmental impact reports by the page, and now it seems more appropriate to measure them by the pound. So this is the EIR for the last regional plan, the 2015 plan. It's 2,400 pages long, and it's 16 pounds. I actually had to weigh it because it's so heavy. So 16 pounds is a lot. And for perspective, I decided, well, it's around my house is 16 pounds. Next slide, please. So 16 pounds is like one of those super extra large bowling balls that you go there and you pick up, and it's really, really, really heavy. That weighs about 16 pounds. My daughter's workout weights, they're about 15 pounds. And yes, the final thing, my dog weighs about 16 pounds. And frankly, he's much more enjoyable than any EIR that I've ever had. So why is this? Why are these things so big? Why are they so complex? Well, there's many reasons. The first is that our analysis over the last 30 years has become more complex. We deal with things like greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled. And those are all part of a complex models that we have to have. And we also have things like evolving case law, like Frant Ranch, that talks about air quality and health outcomes. And the purpose is to make these EIRs legally defendable and thorough. And this is not an abstract concept. For example, in 2011, the regional plan was approved by the Sandag board, and it was sued. It was sued on the environmental impact adequacy. So 6 years later, the lawsuit went all the way through the local courts and all the way up to the Supreme Court. And Sandag did prevail on the one narrow issue that was in front of the justices at the time. So pragmatically, we're trying to make this document, environmental impact report, as sound as possible. So if we do get sued on it, it's defendable. So the EIR will be long, thousands of pages long, containing numerous appendices. So what are the top 5 things that I want everybody to know? The first thing is that CEQA went into effect in January 1st, 1970. And the purpose is really simple. It's about disclosing impacts and allowing public participation in those disclosures, which is then provided as a decision-making tool for yourselves as local officials making a decision on the project. And it also outlines mitigation. And that's the stuff that helps to reduce those impacts to what we call below level significance. So the purpose to me was very simple of CEQA. It's a disclosure document that allows public participation for adequate decisions by the board and outlines what mitigation could be. So that's the first thing. What's the next thing? Well, the EIR being prepared, next slide. The EIR that's being prepared for the 2021 regional plan is what we call a program EIR. Sometimes it's called programmatic analysis. And a program EIR is used to evaluate a plan or a program that has multiple components that are either geographically located or as logical parts for a long-term plan. So this sounds very similar to what we're doing as part of the regional plan. It's a long-range planning document. It consists of strategies to improve mobility through integration of transportation and land use, and it has multiple programs, projects, and policies to achieve this goal. So the appropriate document in this case would be a program EIR. So what happens in the future when project level EIRs come in, or project level analysis comes in for those specific projects, they can actually tier off this program at EIR. And specifically, they can use the impact analysis and the mitigation framework. So the idea is like a big umbrella. Well, this is the largest umbrella, which is the program EIR. And underneath there are more focused environmental review, which can utilize that larger umbrella's analysis or framework. So that's the second thing I'd like you to consider. Third item, next slide. So the environmental impact report for the 21 regional plan will cover 19 different resource areas. And you can advance that slide, Arthur or Kendall. Thank you. And these topics will range from things like aesthetics and visual to wildfires, water supply. And what EIR is doing is looking at whether in those resource areas, there's a significant change, or what we call an impact, to the physical environment. Now, out of these 19 areas, some are much more interesting to the public than others. So in the last EIR, the 2015 regional plan EIR, we received hundreds of letters and thousands of comments. And if you take all those comments and you throw them all into a big word cloud, here's what you get. Next slide. So the top items, not surprising: housing, land use, greenhouse gas, energy. Those are the top concerns from the public. Mineral resources, paleontology, agriculture, not so much so. But while some topics are more interesting to the public and have more scrutiny, all are important and have to be analyzed with the same rigor. Remember I said we were sued with the 2011 Regional Plan EIR? Well, while we prevailed on the analysis of greenhouse gas, which was the item in front of the California Supreme Court, we actually lost on the analysis of agriculture. And I don't think that's, at the time, we didn't think the analysis of agriculture was going to be a big important topic, but it actually was an important topic. And all these have to be analyzed equally and the same level and rigor. So that's the third item I'd like to consider. Next. The fourth item will be alternatives. Now, with a lot of people, alternatives are the heart of the environmental impact board. It's a way of comparing and disclosing the options that are available to the decision maker and to get public input on those options. So some have used analogy of bookends for alternatives, where the project, in this case, it'll be the 21 regional plan, is in the center. And on one case, there's an alternative on one end, and there's a bookcase on the other end is another alternative. I kind of prefer the dial. I think of dialing up things or dialing back things. So in this case, like an alternative focusing on maximizing policies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, that could be one alternative, where you dial up maybe things like fees and focused development and mobility hubs. And that could constitute one type of alternative to reduce impacts on the environment. You could also have another alternative. Maybe you dial up to adoption or consistency with adopted land use plans. And that could be another alternative that's using maybe a different network and different policies to be more consistent. The EIR will have a range of reasonable alternatives that avoid or substantially lessen significant impacts on the physical environment. That's the fourth item I'd like to consider as we're moving forward. Next. The last one is mitigation. So when we talk about significant impacts, we have a discussion of what could reduce those significant impacts to below the level of significance. This is called mitigation. So under CEQA, mitigation must be adopted unless it's socially, economically, politically, or technically unfeasible. And all that's a separate discussion for a different date. But some examples of mitigation, and just kind of things you probably have experienced in your past is, well, we might put a undercrossing underneath the highway to allow wildlife to move through it. Or we might have, for example, paleontologists on the site in case during construction, they dig up a fossil and we need to know, characterize that fossil. So I wanted to focus in on this last part of the presentation on how does mitigation go from the identification in the plan to implementation on the ground. Next slide. So this is the 8 mitigation conditions that were in the 2015 regional plan when it was adopted. And one of the mitigations that was adopted, number 3 here, was to formalize SANDAG's support to build out a network of publicly accessible EV chargers. The idea was that there's not enough EV infrastructure, so that the range anxiety of potential buyers is high. And if SANDAG was able to create more EV infrastructure, we'd see more EVs on the road, and it would reduce GHG. So next slide. So our hardworking staff in the Mobility and Innovation Planning team got together on this, and they actually partnered with SANDAG, with County APCD, and the state to leverage existing local funding with state funding. This became known as the California EVIP, Electric Vehicle Program, San Diego Incentive Project, which went live in October of 2020. So by leveraging our funds locally, both SANDAG funds and the county funds, along with state funds, it created a bigger pool of funding for EV infrastructure. I'm happy to say that they had rebates programs that 1 week after all the funds were what we call prescribed or reserved. So it was a very successful program, and it actually helped meet not only our regional plan desired to have more EVs, but also the EIR's mitigation requirement to reduce GHG throughout the region. The EIR will have a list of mitigation conditions. It's what's called a mitigation monitoring and reporting program. And just like this greenhouse gas EV infrastructure program, we will report to the board on how the program of the EIR implementation measures are being achieved. Next slide. So with that, I'd like to just wrap it up, let you know about 2 key dates. The release of the draft EIR will be in August for a 45-day public review. I hope to come back to the Regional Planning Committee at that time to make a short presentation to kind of highlight the outcomes of that EIR. Staff will then be responding to comments received and finalizing the draft EIR for the board's consideration in December. That concludes my presentation. I'd like to turn it back over to Chair Salas to address any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Keith, and thank you for that review of why EIRs are important and their purpose. So with that, are there any members of the public that have a question or a comment?
Chair, I don't see any hands from the public.
Okay, seeing none, are there any committee members that have questions or comments?
If I can jump in, this is Gastel from Lemon Grove.
Yes, George?
Historic resources are important to EIRs, and I didn't see them listed there. Are they historic and archaeological resources? Are they listed along with the paleontology, perhaps?
They're all lumped into cultural resources. So there's a chapter on cultural resources, which will include historical resources as well as prehistorical resources.
Oh, a prehistorical would be the paleontology, though, right?
So the paleontology as well, prehistoric resources there, cultural resources being early man, and then historic resources being things that are approximately 50 years or older.
Interesting. Okay. What wonderful. So a relic left over from the mission era would be in the cultural resources. It's older than 50 years. Where would that?
So it would be under cultural. We will make it very
Okay.
clear on mission level resources where they would be analyzed in terms of impacts.
Wonderful. I think the cultural resources should be on there. Yeah, I teach history, so thank you for clarifying that.
You're welcome.
Any further questions? Okay, Keith, it was great seeing you, even if it's virtually. And thank you very much for the presentation. So with that, we'll move on to item number 8. And thank you again, Keith. So item number 8 is the 2021 Regional Plan Series 14 Regional Growth Forecast, Forecast and Sustainable Community Strategies Land Use Pattern. And Rachel Cortez and Allison Wood will do this presentation. So, and again, it's an informational item, so there's no action required on this.
Thank you, Mayor
Okay.
Salas. Thank you.
Thank you.
You can hear me, everybody?
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. So my name is Rachel Cortez, and I'm a researcher and modeler in the Demographic Analysis and Modeling Group. My specific department is responsible for the growth forecast and the yearly population and housing estimates that are used for modeling and research purposes throughout the region. I'm going to give a brief recap on efforts to develop the 2021 regional plan, sub-regional and regional growth forecast. So we can have the next slide, please. So the process to build the forecast takes place in several stages. The first is to develop the region-wide forecast of population, jobs, and housing units from the base year of 2016 to the horizon year of 2050. This is done with a variety of external data sources and rates that are developed from historical data for the region, along with assumptions about how the region is projected to grow. You can see in this chart, these are the region-wide results of the forecast. So we are projecting that about 437 more people will live in the region by 2050. There'll be about 440,000 more jobs and about 274,000 more housing units over the 34-year period. Next slide, please. Specifically, talking about the data we use population projection series from the Department of Finance that was released in 2020 of January 2020. The housing units and jobs are forecasted using this population data, along with cohort-specific rates developed from historical data and assumptions about growth in the region. Staff held several peer review panels and consulted with internal and external stakeholders to develop and assess these rates and their use in the regional model. Next slide. The region-wide forecast then serves as an input for the sub-regional allocation of population, housing units, and jobs to smaller level geographies. These are the data, these small level data are what are used in the transportation modeling efforts for the plan and for a variety of other research and planning efforts. This chart shows a high-level illustration of the flow of information from the regional data to the data that are developed for the sub-regional areas in the county. There are also considerations of legislation such as SB 375 that must be incorporated into the process and models. I don't think that was me, so I'm going to keep going, but oh, the dog. Sorry, it's okay. Okay. Modeling and planning staff collaborated to fulfill those requirements and create a sustainable pattern of growth for our region. After the basic information on housing and jobs are allocated to the sub-regional level, socioeconomic and demographic information is assigned, such as the type of housing unit, the members of the household and their demographics, and industry sector of the jobs in the region, just to name a few of the characteristics. Next slide. In order to place this growth throughout the region, information on housing unit capacity collected over a several-month period from each jurisdiction's planning staff is used along with information on existing demographics of an area and assumptions on how they may change. The capacity inputs that we received were first used in this federal update to the transportation plan in 2019. With some small changes, these are the same input data that we are using in the version of the forecast for the 2021 plan we're here to talk about today. These were finalized in 2018, 2019, and they do have some additional changes incorporated and some updates that took place between when we started and when we finished. So after we developed the housing unit capacity and modeling assumptions for the sub-regional allocation, we started to develop data and methodology for a sustainable community strategy land use pattern, which Allison Wood will now discuss.
Great, thank you, Rachel. And good afternoon, everyone. So planning for future growth and development is foundational to the regional plan. And in the 2021 regional plan, we're including a sustainable pattern of growth and development that aligns with the transportation system, preserves open space, and supports our housing goals. I'm going to go through a few slides to provide an overview of the land use pattern for the draft regional plan, and I'll share some initial findings on a landscape carbon analysis that's currently underway. Go to the next slide. So I wanted to start with the requirements. Under SB 375, our sustainable community strategy must include a pattern of growth and development that meets three key requirements. First, it must help us meet our greenhouse gas reduction target. So that means we need to grow in a way that provides more mobility options to people and shortens their trips. And this translates to more housing near transit and other key destinations like job centers. Second, the land use pattern must accommodate the Cycle 6 RHNA allocations. Many of you are working on your housing elements now and making changes to allow for this type of growth and development. And the regional plan will support and complement your efforts. Finally, the third requirement is to use the latest planning assumptions. As Rachel described, we've worked closely with your planning staff to incorporate the latest data on housing capacity for each of your jurisdictions. Go to the next slide, please. The regional mobility hub areas provide the framework for the land use pattern in the regional plan. These are areas of activity where there is a concentration of housing, jobs, and amenities that already exist. And the mobility hubs were defined using a data-driven process that looked at the proposed transportation system, along with community characteristics and demographics that resulted in these 31 areas identified across the region. Focusing future job and housing growth in these areas will align with the future transportation investments and create opportunities for more mixed-use communities. Next slide, please. Shifting gears slightly, I want to talk about broader land cover in the region and how we're analyzing carbon storage of our natural and working lands. We started by looking at the past and how land cover has changed in our region over time. These two maps on the screen are a comparison of land cover from 2001 and 2016. And I want to point out a few key changes between these 2 years. First, the areas of development can be seen in the gray. And while development during this time was still largely concentrated in the western third of the region, there is the growth in land being developed. Another key change you might notice are in our forested areas. Those are the dark green areas on the map. We've lost acres of forested area over this time, largely due to wildfires in our region. And finally, another key change is in the agricultural lands. These are in the light green areas on the map, mostly in North County. And we can see that the agricultural land has declined as well. As we do our carbon analysis, each of these land cover types vary in their ability to store carbon. So for example, forests store a lot of carbon and urban or barren lands do not. And we've worked with our consultant team to both prepare this land cover data and also apply carbon values. So we can go to the next slide, please. On this slide, we have similar maps again for 2001 and 2016, but this time we're looking at carbon stocks. So you'll see that the darker red areas on each map align with those forested areas that we saw on the prior map. So when we quantify these total carbon stocks and add them all together, we see a decline from 2001 to 2016 of about 6%. We know that this carbon storage is critical to meeting carbon neutrality goals. So as we continue in this work, we're going to be analyzing future scenarios, considering both our land use pattern that I described, as well as land management activities that can impact our ability to store carbon in the region. We'll also be looking at co-benefits, such as water quality, agriculture quality, and biodiversity. And we intend to bring back more information on this analysis once this work has been completed. Next slide, please. For next steps with our land use related work, I wanted to highlight a few things. First, we're completing the necessary modeling and analysis for the regional plan. You've seen a lot of the data and analysis that has been underway in recent board meetings, and the draft plan will really synthesize all of that information into one document. Second, we'll complete the landscape carbon inventory work that I described. Also, we know that data from the regional growth forecast and the SCS land use pattern inform many local planning efforts. So we'll be working with your staff to make this data available and assist with identifying CEQA streamlining opportunities as well that Kate briefly spoke about. Finally, we will also be getting to work on Series 15 shortly. So Rachel and her team will be working closely with your planning staff to begin the process to collect updated planning information. So with that, I will hand it back to Chair Salas, and Rachel and I are happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Rachel and Allison, and for the report. And I did have a question relative to the loss of forest land. 6% seems like it's a lot, even when you're talking about a lot of it being lost due to the drought and fire season. So in the modeling, is there any plan to try to mitigate that through denser urban forestation?
Yeah, so the tool that we're using to do this carbon analysis is called TerraCount, and it breaks down into even more detail than those land cover types that I showed today. There's a lot of detail in there, and we are able to estimate impacts around carbon storage for urban tree planting, absolutely, and other types of land management activities. So we're currently in the process of getting more input from stakeholders on what appropriate land management activities would be that we can incorporate into that kind of future scenario work.
Okay, so so with that, I mean, I hope that there's really a push and a focus on more urban municipalities to really step up their urban forestation plans. I think that's going to be critical in the future, especially as we densify. So, and then I saw on the charts that we have the expectation that housing will keep up with the jobs and the population growth, but we find ourselves getting further and further behind on that. Is there any insight you can offer us on that? I guess that's Rachel's.
Yeah, sorry.
There.
was hoping Allison would do it, but no, I'm happy to answer. We project the number of housing units based on the population. So it's really assuming that housing development will take place in the region. And the real ground truthing of that is typically that housing unit capacity that the local jurisdictions provide that show that there is room for that many housing units. And luckily there was alignment for Series 14 between how many housing units we projected the need to be and how many units we have capacity in the region for.
Okay, thank you. Now, are there any members of the public that have any questions? Do you see any hands raised, Rachel?
No, Chair, I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, great. So any members of the committee have any questions or comments?
Yeah, this is Gastel. If you can go back to one of the charts that compared 2001 and 2016, where they had the gray area to represent urbanization. Yeah, I was trying to get an orientation on this, and I see to the east, when you compare 2001 and 2016, to the east, there are a few significant patches of gray that appear, and I was wondering if you could tell me what they are, so that I can get an idea of how it relates to the urban world that I know. I see a big blotch of gray that's kind of in terms of latitude a little bit like if you draw a line from Mission Bay out to the east, you come to a big circle of gray that emerged in that 16-year period. What would that represent?
I don't want to make any guesses right here off the spot. So let me take that back, and we can update these maps to provide more of that orientation.
To have them correspond with cities that we're familiar with. Yeah, because it looks like it's too far north to be Otay Ranch.
Right.
So I wasn't sure what it is.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Yep.
And then there's a couple areas kind of on the eastern edge of what we think of as being the urban area. There's a couple big blotches that it looked like they were really small gray pieces that turned into bigger pieces. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'd be good to know. What we're talking about with those, in terms of communities that we'd be familiar with.
That's a good thought, George. So are there any members of the public that want to weigh in on this?
Mary, you have 3 people with their hands up. I think Mayor Lisa Huebner was first, and then John Minto, and then myself.
Okay, yeah. Who was first?
I was Mayor Huebner, Solana Beach.
There you go.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question too about the reforestation, not only in the urban areas, but I would guess that's through the programmatic EIR for the Regional Transportation Plan, there might be some mitigation measures for actually reforesting the areas where it was forested. Is that possible, or is it just all going to have to go to the urban areas? Or do we even know? I guess that's a Keith question if he's even still here.
Keith, are you still here? I would say that it's something we'll definitely explore. So I don't know for sure all the CEQA ramifications, but we can definitely look into that.
Okay, a couple more questions. These mobility hubs kind of confuse me, because when we had our sub-regional meeting last week, or maybe it was this week, I don't know, it's all blurs together. We were talking about how many of the resources that are going to be at our mobility hubs are going to be up to the cities themselves to put together, that Sandag may be working on providing us with some funding, but the coordination would be up to us. So there's that portion of it. But in light of this, it says that the staff report says that this is where the development will be focused. Yet I noticed that there's an employment center in, for instance, Carlsbad, that is a very different sort of mobility hub than Solana Beach / Del Mar, which is just a beach and fairgrounds destination. And there must be distinctions in how that's going to be interpreted. Am I right? And If you can explain a little bit more about that, I'd like to hear it.
Sure. So yeah, as we went through the process, we considered available housing capacity within all of the different mobility hubs. So that underlying planning data that Rachel talked about. And so that's a foundational part of the process for identifying how many housing units can go to each mobility hub, for example. So you're right that each mobility hub is expected to take on a different amount of growth. And just to give some sense of scale, the areas that have undergone recent community plan updates by the city of San Diego, like Kearney Mesa, Mission Valley, the urban core, those are some of the hubs that are expected to take on the largest amount of housing growth.
And I noticed also that this particular population growth forecast was reduced from, I think it was 3 million to 2.7 million. That's a number that sticks in my head. And how is that reflected in, certainly wasn't reflected in the RENA numbers, I understand that.
Mm-hmm.
But is it being reflected in from this point forward in the planning?
Yeah, Rachel, do you want to talk about that change in population growth?
I think so. So when we started planning for Series 14, we were always using the Department of Finance population projection series, and they submitted a update to that series in 2020. So we revised the numbers, and that included a lower population total for almost all counties in the state, actually. So the lower population numbers are reflected in all of the Series 14 data from this plan so far. And the total, I think the total number of housing units that were assumed in the earlier versions of Series 14 were you're right, closer to 300 or over 300,000, and now we're closer to 200 and 274 by 2050.
I had an extra zero in there. Okay, as long as it's being considered, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, Mr. Minto. Oh no, Ms. Gasterland.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mayor Salas. So I have a question about the same slide that was brought up earlier, and then a question about the slide, I think that's 2 before it. So this would be the grasslands forestry slide.
Slide 10.
Are we able to bring it up? There we go. It's coming. Okay. So the differences between these two slides, 2001 and 2016, are striking enough, especially like the forestation, that make me wonder whether different priority orders were used in the overlays. So each kind of overlay, a given area may be in multiple overlays. So for example, if the grassland is on top of the forest, some of the forest would show up as grassland instead of forest, versus the other way around. So I think it's worth making sure that your data layers are in the right order for both of these. I guess that's more of a comment than a question. And, is it possible that there might be some artifacts driving the way the final visualization is?
It's certainly possible. I'd have to, defer to our consultant team that really helped put this together, but we can take that back and look more closely. I mean, I think at any time going between two historical years like this, there's, opportunities for things to be, classified a little differently or things like that. So we'll confirm that.
Yeah, my sneaking suspicion as a person who does this kind of stuff all the time is that you might want to do some sort of integrity check. Just pick 2 or 3 places that you know what they are, and then look to see, is that what they are in both of them. So it's my suggestion. Let's go back to the mobility hubs that Mayor Huebner had remarked on.
Okay, was that the extent of the comment?
Well, no, I wanted to go 2 slides back to the mobility hub slide. That was my second comment.
Mhm.
Except we're not screen sharing anymore.
I'm sorry, I need a slide number for
Oh,
that.
slide 8, please, Kendall.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, sorry. There we are. So I see that there are coastal mobility hubs, and then there are gateway mobility hubs, and there are major employment center mobility hubs. And so, for example, Oceanside is a gateway mobility hub, and Vista is showing up as an urban core mobility hub, I think, or suburban. So my question is about the coastal mobility hubs and connectivity to them. So we see a Solana Beach Del Mar, down below we see a Coronado. Are you thinking about these coastal mobility hubs? I guess I'm in a way asking the same question as Mayor Huebner, but what is your thinking? Why divide the hubs into these categories? Are each category going to be receiving different treatments, different priorities?
Yeah, so let me clarify that, because the intent is not that all of the coastal mobility hubs, for example, are treated the same. In fact, we feel like each of these mobility hubs is very unique and is going to need its own local planning and coordination on the type of transit or other, mobility options that are in that hub, the types of growth that's anticipated. There's a lot to say about why each one is unique. And so, I think our effort to classify these is just to show that there are differences at a high level. So I don't want to give the impression that that's going to mean much beyond that, just to show that there are differences and we acknowledge them. But if that's a confusing way to do that, definitely point taken.
Yeah, it's great though. It's thank you for this. Those are all my.
Okay, thank you. And last but not least is Mr. Minto.
Okay, a few questions that I had. Some of them were similar, and these might even be, obvious answers, but I just wanted to at least make sure that we got it on the record. When we talk about some of the population and growth, like we saw, I think the first slide, are any of these numbers adjusted after census data is released instead of just using the Department of Finance information?
Yeah, that's a great question. For Series 14, the data that are going to be used in the 2021 plan, there will be no adjustments when the 2020 decennial census data are released. But for the next plan, which Allison was talking about, the planning for the Series 15, hopefully this decennial census data will be released by then, and we can use it as the base year of the next data, of the next forecast and all those procedures. And I'm not sure how often the Department of Finance seems to release a new projection series every 2 to 3 years. Yeah. I would imagine that they would release a new one when there are new decennial census data to benchmark, but I don't know exactly. They do what they want, and it seems to be every 2 or 3 years, but
to me that's important because like we already show reduction of population just based on those Department of Finance numbers. And if we show that there is a slower growth period in the last 10 years, then somehow it changes the modeling, because it would indicate that there is a slower growth rate. And if we expect a more rapid growth rate at some portion over the next 10 years, then I think we need to identify what would cause that, spurt in growth, so to speak. So just some things that I think about when I look at my planning in my city and how do I plan for the housing and business and whatnot. So then also, along with that, I guess I'm curious if you heard anything, and this probably goes to what you said about they do what they want at the state. Is HCD considering any adjustments to RENA because of those lower numbers? Are we just still out on our own with that?
Um, I could start, and maybe if Allison knew anything else, you could pipe in. But my understanding is that this RENA cycle is kind of on the books, and that there won't be any revisions to that after the fact. But Mayor Huebner did bring up a good point that I think that the RENA allocation was partially based on the earlier series of the population projections, and we revised with those data that were in the 20s. So there is kind of a difference there, and that's part of the issue. But I think hopefully after Series 15 and we get, we start with that decennial census, we have 2 more planning cycles, we'll be more on the same timeline with that data again in the future. And I got a note that I would like to mention also that for SB 375, we are required to be within 1.5% of the Department of Finance projections. We opted to use them as the control totals, but even if we didn't, we would be held to that stipulation.
Right. Well, I have to thank Lisa because it reminded me of that, those RENA numbers and, the discussion that we had, gosh, I think it was almost 2 years ago now when HCD was down here and we first started talking about the RENA numbers, that before we would put numbers in our plans and we didn't always meet those, but at least we had some numbers in a plan. And then they said, oh no, everybody's going to have to meet those numbers. If you put a certain number in your plan, then you have to meet it. And the question is, well, if we don't have the number of people coming, how do we meet those numbers? And once again, I have to ask the question is, now, does that mean that there's going to be some kind of fine, or do our councils go to jail for not meeting those numbers? Be a little facetious here, but it's kind of like, how do you make decisions and then you don't? I mean, if I'm a restaurant owner and I know that I generally get a certain number of people that come in over the Easter holiday, and I prepare for that, and then they don't show up, I'm still stuck with the food. Well, I'd rather not be stuck with the food. I know that's a crazy metaphor, so to speak, but anyhow, that's what I was thinking of. And then also greenhouse gas elements. When we look at that, do we look at, for instance, population plus air quality? For instance, let's say you have a greater density of population, but the air quality is good, but you have a lower population, but the air quality is bad. So how do we make those adjustments? Or, so does that change the way we would do something in a more highly populated area?
Well, I can say for greenhouse gas emissions, we're not as concerned with the localized kind of air pollution type impacts like you're describing. So absolutely in the EIR, we look at both of those things. So the air quality analysis does consider populations and how close they are to different sources of air pollution. And the greenhouse gas analysis looks more holistically at the region for sources of greenhouse gas emissions from cars, electricity, et cetera, more like a climate action plan type of inventory of emissions.
Great, thanks. And sorry I'm taking so much time here, everyone, but just very curious. It's interesting to see what some of the topics are here, because I know just a few short years ago, one of the #1 topics that we talked about was water in our region. And that seems to be something that is kind of mentioned, but not necessarily at a higher level. Is there something that has changed, that we now have more access to water perhaps, or we've identified better sources of water? Like for instance, in Santee, Padre is building a water reclamation center that's going to provide about 30% more water to our region. So that reduces the overall amount of water that needs to be going to the rest of the county. Or are things like that taken into consideration? Is that why we maybe aren't looking at them as like one of the top 5, I guess, topics?
I think, are you referring maybe to the EIR specifically, or?
Yeah, well, we have a lot of different things here. We're talking about the carbon, the forest, all that kind of stuff. And I see way down at the very bottom is a mark that says water.
Yeah.
And it's just so small. So my question is it taking more of a back seat? We still monitor it, or why is that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely still an important issue for the region, and we coordinate with the San Diego Water Authority in various ways. I know Rachel can speak about some of the ways they use our data in their forecasting work as well. So there is a lot of coordination that happens.
Okay, I just want to make sure some things aren't left out. Because I mean, we all got to build houses, obviously. Brandon tells we have to, but we know we have to have water to supply them. And so that's a big, I think that's probably all my questions. Sorry, I did make a bunch of notes, so I wanted to get them all covered. And I could have thought about these sooner, but it's funny how when people start talking, you go, oh, that makes me think of something. So I want to make sure I got it all out there. So everybody, thanks for your patience with me asking so many questions.
Thanks, John. You always ask good questions, so don't feel shy about that. I know you're not a shy guy, so keep on asking those questions. Just a thought on that. I know that I recently saw a report with the County Water Authority and the way that the San Diego water supply has been diversified over the year, and that we're actually in a lot better shape than we were, say, 20 years ago because of all the initiatives that they took. So relative to the slow growth of population, though, it'd be interesting to see how the high cost of housing relates to people deciding not to live here or moving away from this area. Because, when we see those rising housing prices, month after month, I think that that's just going to discourage people from moving into this area, as well as a lot of other high cost items within the state of California. I know that a lot of people think that the grass is greener on the other side and they're leaving, but they also find out that, oh, maybe it isn't, and want to come back. But once they leave the California housing market, they're pretty much done. So anyway, it'd be interesting to see what kind of correlation that is, the lack of housing affordability, and how that has slowed down population growth, if any. I think that's an important thing to understand.
Yeah, Mayor Salas, this is Terry Gasterland. May I make a quick remark to Mayor Minto?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Mayor Minto and others, a very brief remark. One thing we learned as we were putting our housing element together in Del Mar is you must be very careful to really think into the future, and when you do commit to building units in a particular place. And something I'll just bring forward as two examples. If you upzone a region, in our case, it's for up to 20 units per acre, in the same cycle that you depend on it to produce lower income affordable housing, that lower income housing is by right. And that's wrapped into the small print in the law. If you depend on a zone and it's been previously upzoned, I know Solana Beach is using some regions like that. If you don't produce the number of units that you're depending on it on for 2 consecutive cycles, it's by right in the next cycle in the current small fine print of the law. So it's really important to make sure you read all the fine print before certifying or before approving your housing element.
Okay, thank you. Any more comments or questions? Seeing none from the committee members, any last chance for the public to weigh in on this?
I don't see any hands from the public, Chair.
Okay, great. So once again, this was an informational item. And so our next item, item 9, is just a discussion of the next regional planning meeting, which is scheduled for May the 7th at this time. So with that, thank you very much for your attention, and we are adjourned.